Hi, welcome to MBX 9150 Digital Innovation, the introduction to week 4, Attracting Talent, Building the Ecosystem, and Immersive Technologies. I'm your course facilitator, David Goad. We are into week 4 now. I hope you guys are enjoying your long weekend so far. Don't forget to set your clocks ahead tonight, I believe it is, by 1 hour. Spring ahead, they say. Anyways, so here's the review of this week's content coming up and the things that you need to. As with previous weeks, I'll talk about the actual content in the Harvard core readings that are the basis of the quiz that you need to undertake. I'll talk about immersive technologies, augmented reality and VR, and virtual reality, and then I'll go through the to-dos for this week. We are coming up on the halfway point in the course. That means you guys need to have made some good progress in terms of your group projects, and we will talk about that at the end. So this week's readings talks a lot about building ecosystems and attracting talent. And let me just say, as a owner founder myself, when I started my own business, almost 10 years ago now, and then sold it off about 4 or 5 years ago now. Getting good quality people was my biggest challenge. You will find, even if it's an existing business and you're trying to develop a new department around a new technology idea, getting good quality people in the IT space and the information technology space in Australia has been difficult, is difficult, continues to be difficult, pretty much regardless of the subvertical you're in terms of technology. Trying to build the founding team for a project is absolutely critical. You will find that when people pitch their ideas to either angel investors or venture capitalists, very often there's this conversation that the VCs say it's either the jockey or the horse. In other words, is it the actual idea, the new business idea, or it's the team that's implementing it? Most venture capitalists and most angel investors will say that it's actually the team that's more important. What they want to see in terms of the founding team is not only experience with at least some experience, hopefully one of the members, in terms of being an entrepreneur or starting up a business, so that you have some practical view about what it takes, but they also want to see a balanced experience set. So they want to see some people who understand the industry, some people who understand the technology, some people who are commercial, some people are idea oriented. So they want to see a balance in terms of the founding team, and the founding team is absolutely critical in any group's evaluation of a new business idea. I would also say, working in an innovation team now as a consultant that I do on a part-time basis, because I do consulting for a number of different organizations around AI and IoT, I do know that even for innovation teams, it's really important to have sort of the good quality founding team members, particularly because when it's the first few people, really have to be jack of all trades, expert in a lot of different areas, and so you need some people who are willing, to have the right personality sets, to have the right balance of capabilities. So it's absolutely a critical issue and one that's covered in the readings. Attracting key employees will definitely be difficult. Particularly if it's a small startup, the challenge will be you will not be able to offer them huge salaries to come work for you. So how do you get the best people? Because you can't necessarily offer them huge salaries, and you can't offer them huge career growth opportunities because it's going to be a small team, at least to start out with. More often than not, for a startup, the entrepreneurs or the founders will end up offering key employees some form of equity to try and attract them into the business and keep them hooked into the business. But really, what are the issues? What are the things that you need to do to attract teams and good team members? And I think that regardless if it's a startup or a new division within an existing organization, one of the biggest things that will attract people is culture. Is it a group that's going to be supportive, that's going to be fun to be around, where they're going to have a learning environment where people will invest in their development and their learning? These are all things that people will look for in lieu of potentially salaries or other career growth opportunities. Um, then the other thing will always happen is, so you've decided to develop your founding team or your new group. You may, as I said, it's a startup, so maybe people that, within your startup team, a few individuals, the owner founders plus a few employees, and maybe within a bigger organization, starting up of a new division. The thing will be that there will be assistance that you'll need from outside of your group. There will be skill sets that you realize that you don't necessarily want to have in your group full time because you don't have a full time requirement for it. For example, HR resources, finance and accounting resources, these kinds of things. But you want to be able to get access to that expertise. So how do you attain that expertise? If you're a small startup, How do you get this from other people outside of your organization? You know, where do you find a professional accountant? Where do you get HR resources? Where do you get recruiting resources? These are all challenges. If you're within the larger organization, how do you get these support functions, which are probably already there, but are focused on the other parts of the organization are larger, to spend time and to support you, or at least, at the very least, get out of your way. So these are challenges that starting up a new group or organization or a new startup or people face. Then the next thing is roles and responsibilities. If it's a new startup or if it's a new division within a large organization, the roles and responsibilities are probably going to be very unclear. People will have multiple roles and responsibilities. They won't be able to be specialists. They will need to be jack of all trades, willing to muck in when a new need is identified in terms of help. So there's going to be, people need to be flexible. The resources that you're going to hire that come into that group will need to be flexible. They will need to recognize that not everything will be very well defined up front, and so they need to be flexible in terms of their job definition, willing to experiment, willing to learn. It takes a really different personality set in those types of organizations, and you really need to make sure people are prepared and understand what that means. One of my biggest learnings when I started my business, like I said, it was over 10 years ago now, it was a long time ago now, was that I brought in people in the business. Some people were previously had experience with startups, and some people had come from the corporate sector. And what I realized is those people who come from the corporate sector who had never been in a startup or who had never started up a new venture within a larger organization really struggled, because they didn't realize that you have to be much more bottom line focused. It's more about coming up with an idea, having a product, executing on it, getting some revenue in the door, getting the bills paid. Building a good PowerPoint might be interesting, but it's not a value add to an organization in that context. You actually have to demonstrate results. And I found that people in larger organizations struggled with that. And they also struggle with the fact that, in a larger organization, they might have a lot of support, but either in a new startup or in a new division within a large organization, they might not have that support. And so that would be a struggle point for people as well. Then there's this issue of open innovation versus closed innovation. The idea, these are topics that are covered in my other course, Digital Strategy. Basically, the idea is that in an open innovation framework, you believe that everyone in the organization is responsible for being innovative, and you create a culture that fosters and gives people the ability to experiment and be innovative within reason, but within there is a responsibility in their focus areas. Closed innovation says that innovation is a function that you hive off and you make specific people responsible for that. It's important that, most startups and most new startup organizations within large business tend to be more open in that concept. But it's important that people are aligned in terms of what your views are, in terms of how you're going to manage innovation. And I would say that most organizations these days, it's more typical to be open, closed innovation shops, where people say that, the decision-making process in that is for specific individuals only, is probably an old style of management, I guess. Then there's this issue, if you're going to be in a startup, do you participate in an incubator or an accelerator, and which is right for your business? So incubators typically tend to be organizations focused on supporting people develop ideas. So they will typically be group areas where you can get a hot desk, where you can participate with other new startups, where they will give you mentor support, where they will give you support in terms of technology, ICT support, accounting support, that kind of thing, these kinds of things. But so it's more of an environment an incubator is, but it's not necessarily, they don't have any pre-built vendor VC financing or financial support resources. So that's more of an incubator. The idea is to start new ideas or foster startups or new businesses in the first few months of the life of the organization. Accelerators are, on the other hand, will typically have a lot of the same characteristics as an incubator, but are designed to take smaller businesses and make them bigger businesses. So they will probably have more resources in terms of financing. There may be some pre-built deals in terms of how much money they will give you or support, but then how much equity you have to provide to them as an accelerator. So there's more about actually accelerating the idea, providing resources from a financial perspective, and to get hopefully get the organization to scale very quickly. The one thing you have to realize for both incubators and accelerators is that there are a lot of them out there these days. In the greater Sydney area, I could probably count at least 50 to 100. that come and go. They tend to focus on, like I said, either being an incubator or accelerator. They tend to focus on specific industries, specific types of technologies. So as a new startup, you really want to kind of shop around and find the incubator or accelerator that you think is the right one for you based on the type of area that you're focused on, the type of startup you're doing, the type of help that you need, these kinds of things. So I would caution against jumping into any incubator or accelerator very quickly. You need to do your research to figure out which is the right one for you. When you're coming up with a new organization, this is one of the diagrams from the readings, and it talks about how do you come up with a new venture. Do you decide to go it alone or be a single person, or are you going to have partners? If you're going to have partners, what are the roles and responsibilities? Do you have enough capabilities within the team with your founders to do the business, or are you going to have to go outside? There's a bunch of decisions you have to make. There's no right answer to this. What I would suggest to you, however, is that you put a lot of thought into this if you're going to do a new startup. What I find with a lot of startup organizations, and I've coached a lot of startups either through the Sydney University Genesis program or the CSIRO on program. I probably coached, I don't know, 50 to 100 startups over my career. They tend to make the decisions in terms of who their business partners are going to be emotively and not logically. Sometimes your friend is probably your worst person to be your business partner. Business partnerships can be, in some cases, almost more. They can be a challenge. They can be challenging. They're worse than a marriage in the sense that you see the person pretty much all the time, probably more than your spouse or significant other. You really need to make sure that you are aligned with your business partners. And when I mean aligned, not necessarily that you like them or that they're your friends, but that you have complementary skills and you have a complementary view in terms of where you want to take the business. So one of the things I always coach entrepreneurs about is to make sure that if they're working with other founders or they're talking about bringing other people into business, that they really spend a lot of time sitting down and talking to each other and figuring out, do you have the same views about where you want to take the business? Because it can be absolutely critical. For example, in my personal experience, one of the reasons why I sold my business after 7 or 8 years of running it was not that, it was in a good profitable state. We made a lot of money from the sale of the business, but the primary reason why I sold it is because my other primary business partner, whereas I realized at that point that I needed to put more money into business to get to grow faster. He just wasn't in a position to do that. He'd just gone through a recent divorce. He had a couple of teenage kids just going into university. He was more interested in taking money out of the business. And I don't think he had the same sort of personal commitment to the business as I did in terms of spending time with it. And that was fine. I still catch up with him regularly. We're still good friends. It was just that there was a difference of views in terms of how the business should be operated. So this is one of the key things, I think, that when you decide whether you're going to go it alone or whether you're going to work with someone else in terms of your new startup venture, really, do you have a synergy in terms of ideas? Do you have a common view in terms of what you want to do with the business, where you want to take it? And then you have complementary skill sets. As I said in the previous slide, you need to make sure that you have a good balance of skill sets. Some people that are commercially oriented, some people that are technically oriented, some people that are in for coming up with the new ideas and working on that. Some people are really good at execution. VCs and angels, if they're going to choose to invest in your business or your new idea, will look at the balance of the skill sets. And if you don't have a good balanced skill sets and have people who have expertise in all the areas that are necessary, they'll be loath to invest in your business. Some of the key leadership roles that you're going to have in any organization, and these roles may be covered by one individual. So one individual may have multiple roles, or may have multiple individuals doing one role. You will need to have people who are responsible, for example, for operating and controlling the business, making sure the money flows. When I had my business, that was very clearly my responsibility. I had to follow up, make sure that people were billing their hours, that the invoices were getting sent out to customers, that customers were paying, that we were getting paid for the products and services that we were selling them. Then you will have other roles of people who, for example, will be the innovator strategist. So in the case of my business, that was very definitely my business partner. He was the innovator he was the thought idea generator, the person who would work with customers to come up with that new concept, that new technology, that new idea. And then you would also need someone who, for example, was looking after partnerships and managing those external relationships. And as you start to build a team and you have more and more employees, they will need to be managed. They will need mentorship and guidance. So who's going to be the manager for them? Who's going to support them? Is that going to be you, or are you going to outsource that? It's not a it's not a failure to realize that you don't have skill sets in this area and decide to outsource it. One of the probably most significant decisions that the two founders of Google made was that, very early on in the history of Google, they brought in a professional CEO to help commercialize the business, and they decided that they were going to focus on the technology and doing the fun things, and someone else was going to run the business. And that was probably one of the smartest things that the two founding members of Google did, was to bring in professional management and realize what they weren't good at. So these are things that you need to think about when you're, bringing people, particularly in the first few roles in the organization. Once the organization starts to build, it's a little bit less sensitive to people and personalities that you're bringing in, and you can be a little bit more flexible. But initially, you really have to think about that. Okay, so that was a review of the core readings around attracting talent and building ecosystems. The technology that we're talking about this week is what they refer to as augmented reality or virtual reality, are also known as immersive technologies. So virtual augmented reality systems, there's a lot of things you have to think about. Well, first of all, and apologies for the spelling mistake here, but according to Gartner, by 2020, 70% of organizations will be experimenting with immersive technologies. So this is one of the top technology trends that people are interested in and are, investing money in and understanding. But one of the questions that I like to throw out there when we talk about immersive technologies is, what are the actual real benefits of an AR/VR solution? Is this a nice to have, or is it going to actually add value to your business? And there's a lot of key sort of solution selection criteria that you need to think about. I've actually written a blog article about this. You can go up and look at my LinkedIn, and I've got a blog article that talks about how do you select an AR/VR technology. Because there's a lot of things you need to think about. For example, degrees of freedom. These are a number of different orientations or ways that you can actually manipulate things in the AR/VR space. Is it, typically they talk about the 6 dimensions or the 6 different angles, things, pitch, yaw, roll, in terms of they refer back to like aircraft. How can you actually manipulate manipulate things in the AR/VR space? That's one of the first things. Is it easy to select and manipulate stuff within AR and VR? Sometimes it's not. Do you need to have special tools, like, for example, gloves that are work with the immersive goggles that people typically use these days? Is there haptic feedback? Haptic feedback means that if you actually touch something in the VR world, you actually get some sort of resistance, either from the glove, or perhaps you get some sort of vibration or something. It gives you that feel, that physical feel that you've actually touched or manipulated something. The frame rate, this is really important in terms of the quality of the VR AR experience. Some technologies don't support a very high frame rate, which is a challenge. Is it easy to navigate around the VR AR world? Is it easy to select things? Is it easy to create and use menus so people can have options? Because even within a VR AR world, they'll still going to want to bring up menus to make certain decisions, and is it easy to do that? And are there alternative interfaces which the VR AR toolset that you're using will support? For example, will it support tangible devices, gesture controls, voice commands, these kinds of things? And then the last thing that you want to worry about is, will it handle human factors? And what I mean by this is, will it handle someone who doesn't have good vision, who doesn't have 3D vision? For example, I had laser surgery which fixed my eyes, but initially, because of the bad eyes that I had when I was younger, I had very, very poor 3D vision, so that I wouldn't have had a good experience in an AR/VR world. But other things, like, for example, people who maybe they have some physical disability or whatever, will the tool set support people with those kind of disabilities? And the other thing that you want to make sure about is that, are people comfortable using the technology for long periods of time? Even the newer headsets that they have can be fairly heavy. And so is this something that people can wear for 4 or 5, 6 hours in an AR/VR world? That will possibly make it limiting to use that. You have to think about when selecting the technology. Then when you're thinking about coming up with an AR or VR program or immersive technology program, right, you have to ask yourself a few sort of core questions as you're coming up with a program and a strategy around it. First of all, how is it going to create value by becoming part of the products and services that you sell, or through other ways in the organization? Are you going to use it, for example, to improve performance across the value chain, for example, in product development, manufacturing, marketing, service? Are you going to use it, for example, in a manufacturing facility to allow your operators to be able to more effectively manage the organization? Are you going to use it in your engineering teams to allow them to more effectively visualize how they're constructing new products? Are you going to use it for training, to facilitate training? These are all the different things that you could potentially use AR, VR systems for. The question is, what is going to be the most important for your organization? There are also some key strategy questions that you're going to have when you select an AR, augmented reality and or a virtual reality technology. First of all, there probably will be a number of different opportunities in which you can use the technologies. Which one's going to be prioritized? Which one will actually generate value for the business? Because in my view, there's lots of AR, VR projects that I've seen out there that don't really generate huge amounts of value for the businesses that are using them or deploying those projects. The other thing is, how will this augmented reality or virtual reality tool reinforce a company's product differentiator? Is this going to be a differentiator for you in terms of the market? Will AR and VR have the greatest impact? Will it be in terms of cost reduction, or are there other areas? Should you insource or outsource? Should you actually have people inside your organization that have capabilities to build and maintain augmented reality systems, recognizing that this is not a build once and forget. You actually have to build and support these tool sets. How is it going to change communication with various people within the organization? This is something you need to think about. There will be deployment challenges. For example, which development capabilities are required? Are you going to have the right skill sets to be able to do that? These are new technologies, and it is very hard to find good resources. Probably one of the biggest issues I think with augmented reality and virtual reality tool sets is how do you create the content? You can have there are some pretty decent hardware products out there right now around AR and VR, but the problem is you still as an organization have to create content for yourselves. For example, if you're going to use it for training, you have to create the training content for your people to use the AR VR system that's specific to your business. If you're going to use it, for example, for engineering design, then you're going to have to actually organize or incorporate the AR VR tools into your engineering tool set, and in how you build content, how you manage all the design activities. There's a lot of work that goes into, probably way more work goes into actually building and managing the content than the actual acquiring and enabling the actual technologies. And how will they recognize your physical environments? These are other things, and what kind of hardware is required. So there's a lot of issues that you have to go through to really make a good AR VR system. So whilst a lot of organizations are using these tool sets right now and are experimenting with them, I would say they're struggling to get broad-based adoption. Probably the areas I've seen them most in has been in product design. Used most successfully is product design and in training, but it's probably not taking up as quickly as people would have preferred. Again, because of these issues that I've identified here and other issues as well. And then the other thing you also have to think about is software development, content publishing model, and how you're going to do that. How you're going to manage the content? Is someone else do it for you? And of course, with any new technology, there will be change management issues. There will be older people or people who are not necessarily that technical savvy who will be nervous about using these new forms of technology. Okay, so I've reviewed the core readings for this week. I've talked about our technology topic this week, and then I'm just going to briefly go through your to-dos for this week. So as with every other week, you have the quiz. This week's on attracting talent, building ecosystems, the core readings. Then there'll be the discussion forum. So there's actually a case study that's covered in the readings around bionics, where the founder actually builds basically bionic ankles that he can use and it becomes a very sort of, I would say, emotive presentation, because the founder is actually an amputee himself. He talks about the benefits that the bionics ankles have provided for him personally, and then they have, you hear lots of stories about how this new technology has essentially changed people's lives. What I would caution with you in watching this case study is that I would caution against getting very into the emotion of the case study. There's no doubt that this technology is changing people's lives, but with any other technology, product, or system, if you don't have the right business model, if you don't have the right ecosystem set up, if you don't have the right relationships, you're going to fail. And even though this technology could change people's lives, because they haven't thought about all these other things and they haven't done it effectively, the business still may not be successful. And I think that's what you guys need to think about when you're talking in discussion forums. You need to be very critical. You need to set the emotion aside about, is this something you want to do because it's going to help people's lives? And say to yourself, what do they need to do to make this a real functioning business, to make it successful? The reason why we're covering the bionics case study is because there's a lot of discussions and issues with regards to this case study with regards to ecosystems and attracting talent, which of course is one of our topics this week. So I would encourage you to have a critical view with a view of, well, if they are more critical and if you can fix these problems, then the business will be successful and help people, which is what they want, and also have an ecosystem view in terms of how how you could potentially solve. And I would also suggest to you to not cheat. This is a case study that is a few years old, so you can do like what I've seen other people do and go on the web and do a bit of a web search to see what's actually happened at Bionics. I'd suggest you do the readings first, have your bit of discussion, and then once you've done that and you thought about it, then you can go and kind of see what the answers or see what's happened to them as an organization. The next thing you have to do is the blog post, which is going to be discuss the disruptive capability of these immersive technologies. So have a little bit of fun with that. I think if you go out and do a web search, you'll find some really good case studies or examples that you can use. And then you're going to have to work on your project groups. Okay, we're into week 4 now. You should have all formed your project teams. You should have all had at least one meeting, and you should have been discussing the idea that you want to present to me for your project idea. You need to do this sooner rather than later. One of the biggest failure points that I've found with groups, people working on the group project, they've left it too late. They've spent the whole term arguing about what the actual idea was, and then they run out of time at the end to do an effective report and analysis and presentation. It doesn't need to be a perfect idea, it just needs to be a decent idea, and you need to have the idea quickly. So please don't get bogged down with arguing amongst yourselves in terms of what the idea should be. I would suggest, it has to be a decent idea, but it doesn't have to be a great idea. You need to try and get your ideas through to me sooner rather than later. Anyways, I hope you're enjoying your long weekend. Again, don't forget to spring ahead, turn the clocks forward. And it's a short week next week, obviously. But anyways, hopefully you'll enjoy the content. If there's any questions, feel free to post them up on Teams for me. Thanks and have a good week.